At 06:45, the mess hall at Fort Raven was alive with its usual morning rhythm. Boots scuffed linoleum, trays clattered, voices rose and fell like a predictable tide. Elena Ward moved quietly near the coffee station, her pale green coveralls blending into the walls, like an intentional design choice. She held a full carafe in both hands, moving slow and deliberate. But the moment Captain Blake stepped backward without looking, contact was inevitable. The coffee hit his uniform in a wide arc. The burn wasn't serious. His pride took the real damage. The mess hall went silent. You could almost hear the heat leaving the room as everyone turned toward the center of the blast zone. Captain Blake didn't move at first. He looked down at the wet brown stain spreading across his chest, then up at her. Elena was already on one knee, napkins in hand. Her voice was quiet, measured. She said she was sorry, but it wasn't panicked or rushed. She never looked away from the fabric she was blotting, as if something about the symmetry of the mess mattered more than the rank above her. Blake stepped back and laughed in short bursts. Then louder. It wasn't amusement. It was the laughter of a man who found a target. "You gonna mop up my boots next?" Sergeant napkins. The room chuckled, some out of fear, some out of habit. One private pointed at the bandage on her arm. "Is that from a paper cut or a spoon fight?" Someone whistled. Someone else repeated the word, "ghost," half as a joke. Elena stayed kneeling. Her shoulders didn't slump. Her hands moved with calm precision. When her sleeve shifted slightly, you could see the edge of something dark near her elbow. Not a bruise, not dirt, something inked with purpose. Master Sergeant Kim sat by the back wall with his tray untouched. He watched her, not Blake. Watched the stillness in her knees, the way her left foot pivoted just enough to give her leverage if she had to move fast. He recognized that posture. It wasn't submission, it was a crouch disguised as obedience. Elena didn't explain herself. She didn't ask for forgiveness. When Blake told her to go find something she was qualified for, she stood, nodded once, and returned to the coffee station. As she walked away, her head never rose above shoulder level. Not from shame, from calculation. She reset the coffee pot with one hand while wiping the countertop with the other. Every motion controlled, balanced. She glanced at the far exit, then the clock. It was 06:49. Shift change happened at 07:00. The east hallway would be quiet. Kim kept his eyes on her as she left the room. He didn't smile, didn't speak. But he'd seen those eyes before. Not the color, the pattern, the way they scanned crowds like blueprints. Not threats. He'd seen that in Fallujah, in Kandahar, in people who didn't need loud voices or medals to command space. Back in the mess hall, someone made a joke about supply clerks and latte foam. Blake laughed louder than anyone. But no one noticed that for the next few minutes. The captain kept glancing at the floor where the coffee had landed, as if something in the silence Elena left behind still lingered. At 05:00 every morning, long before the lights flipped on in the administrative wing of Fort Raven, Elena Ward's rusted silver sedan rolled into the last row of the northern parking lot. She always took the same space, the furthest from the building, just beside the maintenance shed, where the motion-activated floodlights failed to reach. Not from modesty, from habit. It gave her a straight shot to the perimeter road if she ever needed to disappear fast. Her boots hit the pavement with soft discipline. She locked the car, slipped her ID onto the outer pocket of her coveralls, and walked the entire length of the facility. No shortcuts, no eye contact. Inside the supply wing, the air still held the chill of night. She powered up her terminal, reviewed the incoming manifests, and started assigning distribution priorities with a speed that didn't come from training manuals, but from something deeper. Every entry processed with a rhythm more like combat than clerical work. By 07:00, the base began to hum with activity. She'd already moved 3 pallets of MREs and cross-checked fuel supply levels without a single conversation. Elena didn't avoid people. She simply made herself easier to overlook. Long sleeves year-round. Neutral tone responses. Never volunteered for anything. Her reports were always early. Her numbers always exact. But that wasn't who she used to be. 5 years ago, she'd worn different sleeves. Black. Tactical. The only woman in a 4-man recon team operating under Grey Raven, a unit buried so deep in the DoD's classified layers that even base commanders rarely saw the full roster. She was the long eye, designated marksman. But her specialty was infiltration and intelligence, disguises, embedded observation, communication disruption. They called her Veil. The mission in Syria wasn't on any map. The operation name never made it into public record. 1 hour before exfiltration, her team's safe house was compromised. The IED was meant for the entire squad. It took her left arm from elbow to wrist in a single shockwave, shredding muscle, splintering bone, and fraying nerves so fine the surgeons couldn't even trace them all. She carried 2 teammates out anyway. The medical board cleared her with honors and permanent damage. They offered her a seat in Washington, training programs, consultant work, guest spots on panels and panels of people who called combat theater from safe rooms lined with whiteboards. She declined. Instead, she filed a request for reassignment to logistics, base-level clerical. Fort Raven approved it within 36 hours. She never complained, but the scars never quite faded. Beneath her left sleeve, hidden under breathable fabric and a strip of medical gauze, lay a tattoo that covered most of her forearm. Not art, not decoration, a map, coordinates, dates, symbols of operations only the dead would recognize. Woven through the lines were names, men who hadn't made it out of Mosul, partners who died in silence under drone blackout, one in particular that she never spoke aloud, not even in prayer. Every morning, before she opened the stock system, she touched the edge of the patch that covered the ink, not to hide, to contain. Every afternoon, when she walked the perimeter trail during lunch, her eyes swept the base instinctively, cataloging people, vehicles, a routine no longer conscious. Every evening, she left the base with the same route, checking rear-view mirrors at 30-second intervals, noting tailing patterns even when there were none. Some called her overly cautious, others called her strange. No one called her broken. She never wore makeup. Her hair stayed tucked into a low bun that didn't shift when she moved. Her boots were clean but scuffed in places that suggested she cleaned them without caring about polish. She didn't carry a sidearm anymore, but her stride made space in hallways. People moved for her without realizing why. Every few months, new personnel tried to ask about her past. She gave them the same answer. I moved boxes before. I move boxes now. Most stopped asking after that. But the truth lived in every movement she made. A precision no training book taught. A stillness born from waiting on rooftops for hours without blinking. The way her left hand trembled only when she wasn't using it. The tremor came and went like memory. And in those memories lived sand, heat, blood, and ghosts she still spoke to under her breath when no one was listening. Elena Ward wasn't hiding from the military. She was staying close to it, like a soldier who'd lost their rifle but still memorized every shot. Her work in logistics wasn't an exile. It was a vigil. The way some people stand watch over graves, she stood watch over routine. And routine was her armor. At first, it was just the coffee. Captain Blake handed Elena a list of specific preferences. No sugar for Lieutenant Daniels, oat milk for Colonel Hayes, 3 cubes of ice in Sergeant Major Quinn's thermos. He said it like a joke. Let's see if the supply lady can handle liquids. No one corrected him. She nodded once and walked away. At the next meeting, the cups were perfect. Everyone. He didn't thank her. He added a new request instead. Within a week, she was assigned to clean the conference room after morning briefs, not because it was dirty, because it put her on her knees in front of the command team. Blake started referring to her as our logistics barista. No one laughed the first time, but repetition wore down resistance. Soon, even Junior enlisted picked up the tone. She kept moving like she always had, controlled, intentional. She wiped down the table with even strokes, never looked up when people entered, never interrupted, but her posture remained upright. Too upright for someone supposedly beneath notice. Captain Blake's office overlooked the motor pool. He watched her from behind the blinds. She handled pallets like puzzles, her notes clipped to the crates, her pen moving in short, deliberate jabs. Something about the way she operated got under his skin. 2 years earlier, he had applied to Grey Raven selection. He met the physical marks, nailed the tactical exams, and cleared the psych screen. The rejection letter didn't say why. Just one line stood out: lacks the intangible traits we require. He'd read it 10 times before setting it on fire in his sink. Since then, he'd doubled down. Clean-cut uniform, 0 demerits, fitness scores at the top of the base, but his wife had left anyway. Said he wasn't present, said he was more focused on appearances than people. She married a former Special Operations NCO 6 months later. Now Blake controlled what he could: image, order, power over those beneath him, and Elena, with her old boots and silent gaze, didn't fit the mold. She didn't flinch. She didn't respond. That made her dangerous. Privates started mimicking his tone. One joked about putting in a coffee order with Miss Military Starbucks. Another left an empty cup on her desk with a sticky note iced. 2 sugars. No attitude. She said nothing. She returned the cup washed, placed gently on his chair. Master Sergeant Kim watched all of it. 30 years in uniform taught him how rot spreads. Not through orders, through laughter, through silence. He observed Elena's reactions, or rather, the lack of them, how she never showed annoyance, never broke rhythm. But the calm in her movements wasn't submission. It was something else. During a supply shortage, a young corporal panicked about ammo requisition errors. Elena stepped in, didn't raise her voice, didn't blame. She corrected the inputs, explained the chain logic in 20 words or less, and left without waiting for thanks. Kim recognized the tone. Not just technical. Command-level calm. Field-tested. He started watching more closely. Her positioning in rooms. How she always chose seats with a line of sight to both entrances. How her back never faced the windows. How she memorized schedules without writing anything down. Blake, meanwhile, escalated. He reassigned her closer to the command floor, claimed she was needed for efficiency, but he wanted her visible, wanted the others to see her take orders, to see what falling short looked like. Kim knew better. He'd seen that strategy before in officers who confused discipline with domination. By the end of the 3rd week, Elena was performing 6 non-essential tasks assigned solely by Blake. None of them matched her job description. None were questioned by command. She accepted everyone without resistance. But something in the way she held her clipboard, the way she checked her watch before every move, said otherwise. This wasn't compliance. This was surveillance. Kim didn't say it out loud. Not yet. But in his gut, he felt it forming. The quiet wasn't weakness. It was preparation. Something was building beneath the surface. And when it broke, no one would be ready for it. Least of all Captain Blake. The announcement came at Aero 800 during the Monday formation. General Bernard would be visiting Fort Raven in 2 weeks for the annual combat readiness demonstration. A full spectrum evaluation, live drills, tactical coordination, logistics under pressure. Captain Blake stepped forward before anyone else could speak and volunteered the base's logistics unit to participate. Specifically, he said, Elena Ward would lead that portion. The way he said her name hung in the air like bait. She didn't react, just made a small note on the corner of her clipboard and nodded. To anyone watching, it looked like submission. To Master Sergeant Kim, it looked like assessment. He'd seen that same shift in posture before raids, when a soldier quietly prepares to adapt under fire. Blake announced the theme that afternoon in the operations briefing: combat versus support, muscle versus systems. His objective was clear: use the demonstration to highlight combat readiness in real soldiers. Logistics would be shown as auxiliary, slow, reactive. Elena would be the exhibit. He told her she'd be presenting the inventory accuracy report, overseeing mock supply distribution, and participating in the emergency loadout challenge. A desk clerk on an obstacle course. It was a setup. Elena said nothing. But by 17:30 that evening, she had filed 6 new requisitions through the system under standard readiness prep: 6 trauma kits, multiple high-volume bandages, saline solution, epinephrine, extra litters. Enough to stock a small triage point. She routed the delivery to a storage container adjacent to the obstacle course perimeter. No one questioned it. Her paperwork was perfect. She also adjusted the vehicle rotation schedule for the week prior. 3 Humvees sent for maintenance would return 2 days before the event. Each would be restocked with communications backups and water rations. A just in case, she wrote. It sounded routine. It wasn't. By Thursday, Kim had spotted the pattern. None of the shipments seemed wasteful, but they weren't aligned with the drill requirements either. She was building something layered: defensive redundancy, critical assets pre-positioned at weak points, supplies staged in a way that suggested more than a demonstration was on her radar. He asked her about it casually while she inventoried replacement filters near the supply bay. She gave him a half smile, barely visible, and said she liked to be prepared. Then she adjusted the pallet tags without looking up. Every action measured, every movement saying more than words would have. She rewired the RFID tags on a few crates. Nothing dramatic. Just rerouted them through the long-term storage system instead of short-term active issue. That would delay visibility by 72 hours. Just enough time to mask what she was doing without violating reporting. Timelines. Logistics had flexibility when used by someone who knew how to manipulate the lag. She requested badge-level access adjustments for 2 secondary doors into the conference building, said it was to streamline resupply in case of crowd overflow during the demonstration. Security approved it with a single click. Blake was too focused on staging his own portion to notice. He spent his afternoons running drills with a group of volunteers, rehearsing tactical formations and obstacle sprints. His team wore matching t-shirts with bold slogans about grit and dominance. He assigned nicknames to them, called it team cohesion. Most of the younger soldiers followed his energy without question. Meanwhile, Elena worked alone. She walked the demonstration route with a laser rangefinder and a clipboard, timed walking intervals, logged distances between emergency exits and water refill stations, marked shaded areas with poor visibility. She placed nothing directly, but her eyes did the work. By the end of the week, she had submitted a mock-up for her logistics demonstration. It included real-time tracking, emergency repacking under pressure, and a simulation of a delayed supply drop, all framed under the official readiness theme. On paper, it was textbook. In practice, it was layered, flexible, capable of pivoting from rehearsal to response in seconds. Kim began checking the installation's incident logs after hours. He noted 3 minor security alerts in the past month, all dismissed, all tied to proximity breaches in outer zones. He asked for camera review, got nothing substantial, but his instinct told him something was off. The base continued like nothing had changed. Orders moved, routines held, but beneath it, a parallel system was forming, a quiet pattern, built by a woman no one thought to question, a pattern that might only reveal itself when it mattered most. And by then, it might be the only thing standing between them and disaster. At 07:00 sharp, the flag rose over Fort Raven beneath a sky streaked with desert gold. Rows of troops stood in perfect formation on the main drill field, boots locked in silent anticipation. General Bernard, dressed in full-service uniform, sat under a shaded canopy flanked by command staff, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp behind thin lenses. The annual combat readiness demonstration had begun. Blake's squad arrived in matching pressed fatigues, their boots polished to mirror shine, eyes forward with practiced confidence. Elena Ward appeared alone. No formation, no fanfare, just her coveralls, worn at the elbows, clean but creased from work. Her patch reading simply Ward Logistics. Some in the crowd whispered. Others smirked. Blake let the silence speak for him as he gave a brief overview to the general team strength. Simulated supply stress drills, task breakdown. The implication was clear. He was here to show who carried the real weight. The logistics portion began with load sequencing. Pallets of gear marked with color-coded labels had to be routed, scanned, and staged for simulated emergency airlift. Blake's team went first. 2 mislabels and 1 incorrect load. Elena went second. Alone. She moved from station to station without speaking. No wasted steps. Each barcode matched to manifest without a single error. She finished 2 minutes faster than the projected standard. No one clapped, but they noticed. Then came the obstacle course, split into combat versus support. Teams were expected to move through cargo carries, low crawls, and mobility drags under time constraints. Blake's squad took off fast, whooping and shouting, pushing each other through with competitive fire. When it was the logistics team's turn, Elena moved last. She didn't rush. She made every motion count. Halfway through, a young specialist twisted his knee coming off the wall climb. The others hesitated. Elena doubled back without hesitation. She crouched beside him, stabilized the joint with a strap from her own gear harness, and used a shoulder drag to get him over the finish line. It added nearly 3 minutes to her time. She said nothing. The injured soldier whispered thank you. She was already moving to the next checkpoint. The murmurs began to shift. Last came the self-defense showcase. Blake stood beside the training mats with a microphone, voice dripping with pride. For demonstration purposes, he said, we've invited our logistics rep to show us how supply clerks handle hand-to-hand. Elena stood motionless. Blake grinned at the general. Might as well see what kind of fight she's got in her. He tossed a padded baton toward her. It landed at her feet. Elena didn't reach for it. Instead, she looked directly at General Bernard. He gave a subtle nod. She sighed, as if the act itself was heavier than the weapon. Then, slowly, she rolled up her left sleeve. The room fell still. What emerged was ink, not art, but record. The gray raven insignia, a talon overlaying a shadowed wolf's head, etched in black and crimson. Coordinates beneath, operation dates, thin script names weaving through the image like threads of memory. KIA next to each. Not decoration. Memorial. Blake stepped back. Someone in the audience whispered the word. Bernard rose to his feet. His voice cut the silence. Gray Raven. Damascus. He looked at her again. You carried Morrison out. Recognition rippled like shock through the rows of soldiers. The name carried weight. Medal of Honor. The mission no one talked about. Elena gave no reply. She stood quietly, sleeve still raised, scarred skin catching light like topography. Blake opened his mouth, closed it again. The baton at her feet looked like a child's toy. General Bernard nodded once, firm. Stand down, Captain. Let her finish. No one moved. Elena bent, picked up the baton, and with a calmness that bordered on reverence, turned it over in her hands. Then she handed it back to Blake. Not today, she said. The general sat down. The crowd remained silent. Everything had changed. At 09:17, just 20 minutes after the self-defense demonstration ended, Captain Blake was still trying to understand what he had seen when the alert came through the command channel. Sergeant Kim had flagged an anomaly in base requisition routing and submitted it directly to General Bernard's office. It wasn't a complaint. It was a map. A breadcrumb trail of movement patterns, storage containers, and logistics reroutes too precise to be random. The pattern told a story. Someone had been preparing for something much larger than a readiness demo. At 09:34, Bernard called an emergency meeting in the secure ops room. Elena was already there when Blake arrived. She stood at the far end of the table, arms folded, sleeves rolled down again. She didn't apologize. She briefed. Her tone was calm, clipped, and surgical. For the last 3 months, she had been operating under deep internal orders as a domestic threat assessment operative, her designation reinstated as ghost asset under Grey Raven protocols. Her cover as a logistics clerk was the operation. 3 insider threats, each embedded in different departments. 1 in maintenance, 1 in communications, 1 in supply intake. They'd been using their clearances to test access points, observe patterns, and leak base layout data through encrypted routes. The plan was a coordinated detonation, targeting the morning assembly field, the motor pool, and the fuel depot. Maximum visibility, maximum damage. Her unusual requisitions: extra trauma kits, water supply routes. RF tag adjustments were not misallocations. They were countermeasures. Field triage backups, secure water stock in case of contamination, hidden alternate egress routes. The shipping crate near the vehicle checkpoint wasn't holding stretchers for drill display. It was a mobile response cache outfitted with the bare essentials of an emergency talk. General Bernard didn't interrupt. He just listened. Blake stood frozen near the far wall, watching as everything he'd dismissed unfolded into something painfully clear. Elena had been 10 steps ahead the entire time. At 10:06, Blake walked the perimeter near the motor pool. Not under orders, just following the same pattern Elena had used during her walkthroughs. He counted distance from the drainage culvert to the fuel line access gate. Then, beneath a maintenance grate, he found it. A shaped explosive charge, disguised within the housing of an HVAC support unit, rigged to trigger remotely. The blast radius would have sent fuel cascading through the entire depot. The casualty count didn't need imagining. He radioed it in without fanfare. At 10:24, EOD teams confirmed the device and neutralized it. Within minutes, 2 of the 3 insider threats were placed under arrest. The third attempted to breach the exit gate and was stopped by base security using protocols that Elena had personally reviewed the week prior. General Bernard activated Fort Raven's Tier 2 defense readiness condition, then turned back to Elena. He asked one question: "How much more have you built?" She pulled a folder from her inner jacket pocket. Inside were maps, schedules, and personnel audits, all annotated in her handwriting. She had already built a full counter-infiltration profile with probability breakdowns and backup contingencies. She had accounted for response lags, chain of command blind spots, and potential comms sabotage. She handed it to him without ceremony. No speech, no explanation, just results. Sergeant Kim stood near the door. He didn't speak either, but when she passed him on the way out, he gave a small nod. The kind of gesture exchanged between those who've carried too much for too long and still showed up. Blake remained seated, his hands on the table, fingers wrapped tight. Everything he'd thought he understood about power, control, and authority had just been turned inside out, and the woman he'd tried to humiliate had just saved them all. Without firing a shot, without raising her voice, without asking permission. The conference room at Fort Raven was silent, save for the low hum of the air vents and the faint tick of a wall clock no one looked at. General Bernard stood near the whiteboard, arms folded, his expression unreadable. Elena Ward sat across from him, shoulders square, eyes steady. Her coveralls still carried dust from the motor pool. She had not changed, had not flinched, had not claimed anything. He offered her reinstatement, any command, any post, any clearance level she wanted, even off-books assignments, even Grey Raven leadership. She listened without interrupting, then shook her head once. She preferred the shadows. She said, "The work mattered more than the recognition." Bernard didn't argue. He saw something in her face, something not even stars could touch. He asked if she had any request, and she answered without pause. Captain Blake. She wanted him assigned as her operational partner, logistics, security, and base response planning. A strange ask, but she said he had potential. He just needed to understand what strength really meant. Blake entered 5 minutes later. He looked different now. Not in uniform. Not in posture. Something in his eyes had folded inward, like he was carrying something he didn't know how to set down. He stood across from her, uncertain, like a man on ground not yet cleared of mines. She rolled up her left sleeve again, not for display, just enough, just for him. His gaze moved down the ink slowly, line by line, coordinates, symbols, operation names, then stopped. One name, in small block letters, David Blake Jr., Syria, KIA, 14 Novi. His hands dropped to his sides, open. He didn't speak, couldn't. His knees didn't buckle, but his voice did. He whispered something low, not for anyone else in the room, just for the space between them. Elena reached into her pocket and handed him a folded slip of paper. No words, just coordinates. He opened it, scanned it once, then again. His breath caught. David's last letter home had mentioned the mountains, not just any place, but a specific ridgeline where the light moved slow and the sky never pressed down. The army never found the body. Elena had. She buried him where he asked. No marker, just stone and silence and sky. Blake lowered himself into the chair across from her like he was sitting beside a grave. He didn't cry like a child. He wept like a man unmade by truth. Then, with no ceremony, he reached across the table and placed his hand flat against the scarred ink over his brother's name. Not possession, not apology, just contact. She didn't move. She let the moment breathe. Later that afternoon, Blake returned to duty, but he walked differently. He watched more. He spoke less. He began reviewing all internal security protocols using the notes she had annotated. He asked her questions now, not out of obligation, out of respect. They worked together late into the night, adjusting base vulnerability models, planning drills not yet approved. She let him take the lead in the briefings, never once corrected him in front of others, but every plan they made bore her logic underneath. Their silence became a language. Forgiveness didn't come through words. It came through hours spent side by side, preparing others for dangers they would never see. And in that quiet, something heavy shifted, not erased, just carried differently, together. At 05:03, the front gate log recorded her exit. No ceremony, no farewell. Elena Ward left Fort Raven the same way she had entered, quiet, deliberate, unnoticed by most. She carried one duffel bag and left behind a fully updated logistics handover file, organized to the decimal. Her replacement, a bright second lieutenant named Russell, skimmed the documents without realizing the weight they carried. To him, she had been a supply clerk, nothing more. Captain Blake found the envelope taped beneath his desk 2 days later. Plain paper, no signature, no seal. Inside was a folded slip with GPS coordinates, scrawled in neat handwriting he immediately recognized. He drove there alone the next morning. The dirt road narrowed into forest, then opened to a high ridge flanked by 2 pines that bent like they were bowing. The clearing held nothing but a flat stone, untouched by moss, facing east. Beneath it lay his brother. Blake stood there for a long time. He didn't speak, didn't kneel, just stood. Then he sat beside the stone and closed his eyes until the wind stopped moving. On the way back, he didn't take the paved road. He followed the ridgeline, just like the letter had suggested. Weeks passed. The base returned to rhythm. Drills resumed. Reports flowed. Blake kept her memory alive, not through stories but through structure. He rewrote the training modules, included response plans she had built, quietly introduced team drills she had once performed alone. No credit, just systems that worked. In a different state, under a new badge and name, Janet Cole reported for duty at a remote installation nestled in Dry Hills. Her records listed her as a contractor security liaison for infrastructure continuity. Her uniform was standard, except the patch. A gray wolf, head lowered, standing before three small silhouettes at its feet. A guardian, not a predator. She walked the perimeter twice a day, memorized the vehicle rotation pattern within 3 shifts. She didn't speak much, but the base commander noticed their comm logs ran cleaner, fewer gaps, fewer near misses. Someone was smoothing the gears. At Fort Raven, Blake kept her old desk intact. Occasionally, he would find a field memo on his screen he hadn't written, a short line of advice tucked into a longer report. His name in the CC line of an interbase alert he hadn't subscribed to. She was watching. Still, they never spoke again. Not directly, but across distance and silence, their service continued in sync. She protected through presence. He led through principle. The mission hadn't ended. It had only shifted shape. Elena Ward had disappeared, but her legacy moved in shadow, written not in medals but in the behaviors of those who'd been changed by her example. Quiet, relentless, unshakable, just like her. Some of us serve without rank, without ceremony. We walk the perimeter when no one's watching. We memorize patterns, hear silence like warning bells, and learn to move through rooms without being remembered. That's the work. That's the cost. People talk about strength like it's loud, like it kicks down doors or holds the front line. But the kind that matters most, it's the one that waits, the one that carries, that endures without being seen. Because the job isn't to be noticed. The job is to make sure others live to go home. I've worn the patch. I've pulled the trigger. I've buried the fallen with my own hands. And I've sat in rooms filled with noise where no one knew who I was. That kind of service leaves marks. Not the kind you show off. The kind that wakes you in the middle of the night and reminds you that you're still needed. They call us ghosts. I don't mind the name. Ghosts watch. Ghosts remember. Ghosts protect. And if that means being forgotten by history but remembered by the one life you saved, that's enough. So here's my question. Next time you meet someone quiet, someone who doesn't need to speak to hold the room, ask yourself, what kind of strength are you really looking at?